In today's video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about painting Beast Snagga Boyz.
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible to each and every individual's mind, connected to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the Studio Collectors. It's been a real busy time in the studio and we've been up to our necks finishing some commercial projects. Fortunately for us, we still managed to carve out a little bit of time here and there so that we can produce videos such as these so that we all get to become better miniature painters together. So if you have not noticed, I've gotten Sophie to create a new series called Beginner Explains, where she'll go into depth about techniques and concepts from a beginner perspective so that if you have any friends who are new to the hobby or might want to pick up miniature painting, these will be the videos for them. But enough about the channel updates. Now let's get on to the main reason why you've clicked onto this video, and I'm going to talk about how we're going to paint up the Squighog Riders from the Beast Snagga Army box. So as a quick summary, this video covers many materials such as Squig skin, Ork skin, leathers and all of that stuff, and this will allow you to paint up all the Beast Snagga Boyz, including the ones that are unreleased so far, which GW has dropped on us very recently. So as usual, this video has been cut and organized into very useful chapters, so you can skip on ahead to find the particular material or surface that you are trying to paint. So to quickly give an overview of this video, the chapters for these videos are Concept, Foundation, Squig Skin, Ork Flesh, Grot Flesh, Leather, the teeth and gums, armor panels, fur, rusty non-metallic metal steel, weathering, and lastly, environment and basing. So before I start talking to you about how I'm going to be painting my pastel wave squids, let me invite you to join in our community. So the links will be in the description below, just sign up, it's absolutely free and you'll be getting updates about what is happening in the studio as well as some hidden content that we'll be providing just for our community. So enough about that, and now I'm going to talk about my approach of how I'm going to be painting up my pastel wave Squighog Rider Boyz. So if you're here just for the painting segment, why don't you just skip on ahead to the foundation stage where I'll actually be putting on some paints to the models. As a painter, personally, I like thinking about concepts because this gives me a general roadmap to what I intend to do and gives me a rough idea of how I should be going about my painting so that I can achieve the desired results. Of course, along the way, I'll be making some alterations if I deem fit so that the miniature looks as beautiful as possible. This is all not set in stone, so don't worry about making plans. So for the Beast Snagga Squighog Riders, I really want them to stand out from the rest of the paint drops that you amazing community members will be coming up with. From my very limited knowledge of 40k lore, what I know about the orcs from the older orc players are that orcs were originally meant as comedic relief in the 40k universe. As such, they shouldn't be taken too seriously, that's why I thought maybe a more whimsical colour scheme would be suitable for this project. So therefore I wondered, how would a little girl paint this orc army? And this brought me to the pastel wave colour scheme that we have right now. I find that pastel colours work very harmoniously together because they tend to be more desaturated. As such, they are closer on the colour wheel together and we can mix up many colours without overwhelming the project. However, if we use saturated colours because they're really far on the colour wheel, this makes the colour differences too vast and makes it even more challenging to choose a colour scheme. Therefore, I feel that it might be easier to work with pastel colors, and if you have problems choosing your color scheme, maybe this pastel color scheme is just right for you. But for all you grim dark painters out there, fret not because there's something in this video for you too. We'll be painting the Grot in a more traditional orc skin, so we'll call this Grot the interdimensional Grot, who has travelled far and wide from the 40k universe into this whimsical world where Squighog Riders are pastel colored. So in order to achieve this pastel wave looking color scheme, what I've done is I'm going to be constantly mixing some greys into saturated colors. So you might see that very often, and this is the reason why. I'll be using the greys to control the values as well as desaturate some of these colors so that they appear slightly more pastel in nature. As a quick recap, value is how bright or how dark a color is, as well as saturation, which is the intensity of the color. So without further ado, let's head on to the foundation stage of this video. Welcome to the first chapter of this video where we'll be laying out the foundations, the base colors for the entire project. For this stage, I'll be using an airbrush not only to lay out the environmental colors, but also the local colors for the major components, such as the Squig skin as well as the Ork skin. However, if you don't have an airbrush, fret not. I'm only going to be using the airbrush to speed up the process because time is really not on our side. So it's entirely possible just to lay out the colors by brush, and you can do it too. For this stage, I'm going to be using these colors from AK Generation 3 so that I can lay out the local colors as well as the environmental colors. Alternatively, these colors from Games Workshop will do just fine. So without further ado, let's gather up these colors and let's get painting the foundation stage of the Squighog Riders right now. Alright, so we have started off with a black primer. And first and foremost, I'm going with a fluorescent orange, going from the underneath. This will create this warm reflected orange light that I plan to do on the Squig based on the environment. Why this is really important is, I would have only thought about this only because I had a plan. And if you have a plan, you can do this in advance. So I'm doing this for all parts of the model so that the underlying planes have an orange glow, and this will give a more coherent look to the entire model. So as mentioned in my assembly video, this is currently done in its sub-assemblies. So now that the fluorescent orange have been coated, I'm currently using burnt red with a little bit of dark green grey spraying from the top to start laying down the base colors for the Squig skin. Okay, I'm doing this pretty liberally, almost like zenithal highlighting, so that the top faces will actually get this desaturated red color as the base. As for the Ork skin, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going with a zenithal highlight. I'm going to be using dark green grey from AK Generation 3. Just doing this pretty liberally so that it covers all the upward facing surfaces, leaving a bit of orange showing underneath. Next, I'm coating the entire model in a little bit of fluorescent red mixed in with a little bit of dark green grey. This will increase the saturation of the entire Squig skin so that this will look pretty bright and pastel colored. Now I'm going to be creating the next highlight using mint green and dark green grey. Just spraying this from the top, slightly increasing the value and making this orc look as pastel-y as possible. So now that the foundation chapter has been completed, we're going to move on to the most prominent feature of this entire model, which is the Squig skin. Because this Squighog takes up so much surface of the model, I'm going to be using the Squighog skin to inform the viewer on where the light is coming from, and the temperature and intensity of the light. As such, I'm going to be using many colors right here. I'm also going to be paying particular attention to the volumes of this surface because the Squig skin is going to attract so much attention. The human gaze is just very naturally attracted to faces, and the biggest face in this project is definitely the Squighog right here. So for this stage, I'm going to be using these colors right here to paint up the Squighog skin. Alternatively, these Games Workshop colors will work just fine. Alright, so let's gather up all these colors and let's paint up the Squighog skin right now. So now we are starting to paint the Squig skin, and I'm currently using dead red mixed in with a little bit of AK Gen 3 pale grey and a little bit of dark grey to lower the value. At this point of time, what I'm doing is I'm painting it almost like a cartoon style. I'm making sure that the panels that are facing the main light, which is more towards the right hand side, get exposed, and painting in the shapes very accurately. Next, gradually I'm adding in a little bit of dead red and a little bit of pale grey to increase the values. Okay, At this point of time, I'm leaving the darkest recesses slightly more dark, and this will give the result of making the Squig's face look a little bit more contoured and making it look a lot more interesting. I know that a lot of this isn't in the sculpt, but once you paint in these surfaces, it really draws out the contrast and it makes this Squig skin look a lot more expressive. Next, I'm adding in a little bit of pastel pink along with dead red. Okay, this is to increase the value, and at this point of time, I just want to make sure that the shapes are absolutely correct before I commit to increasing the value. At this point of time, remember, just pay particular attention into the micro shapes, such as the little shapes on the hooves, the shapes on the face, to really bring out the expression on the Squig. So right here, I'm going to be adding in even more pastel pink with a little bit of dead red, and I'm featuring little shapes that might appear on the Squig's face. I know that this kind of looks like really thick edge highlighting, and I honestly didn't really like this at all. But trust in the process, and we will have this looking a lot better in just a little bit. So now I'm going to be adding in more pale sand, and this pale sand is going to be for the warmer highlights that's coming more on the right hand side. So I've deliberately tried to make the Squig skin look a lot warmer on the right hand side and a lot more grey and cooler on the left hand side. So what this will aim to tell the viewer is that there's a warm light coming on the right hand side, maybe it's sort of like a sunset, and the left hand side is just regular daylight. Now with the Squighog skin done, we're going to move on to the next organic segment, which is the pastel mint green skin of our Ork Rider. As with all organic materials, I'm going to be doing some color transitions to show how lifelike this Ork can be. So don't be surprised if you see some weird color transitions here and there to make the Ork skin look a little bit more like flesh. As such, these are the colors I've chosen to do up the Ork skin right here. Alternatively, the GW colors right here will do just fine. Alright, so let's get up all these colors and let's get painting the skin on the Ork Rider right now. So now first and foremost, we need to get the volumes correct. I'm going to be using mint green mixed in with a little bit of pale grey, and I'm just going to get the volumes correct. So like, say for example, the fist is a sphere and I'm highlighting it like a sphere. And now, since the face is sort of also like a sphere, I'm going to keep the highlights consistent and keeping it somewhat in a circular nature so that I can educate the viewer that his head is round. Okay, so now with the block highlights done facing the light, I'm going to be identifying some planes that are facing the main light, which is on the right hand side. As such, I'm going to be adding in pale sand with mint green so that I can start to highlight some of these details that are actually facing the light. So from the main shape that we have painted just now, I'm identifying the planes that are easily identifiable. Okay? So as you can see, the mint green, because it's of a higher value, it's really showing the planes that can be highlighted. Next up, gradually adding in a little bit more pale sand and pushing up the values to a higher level. Don't worry, because at this point of time, this is before we are going to make some very drastic color transitions. Just take your time and paint up the Ork skin to a high contrast. So if you are ready for just green skin, this is fine. However, if you want to have some transitions like I have, I've added in a little bit of pink right here. So moving on, I'm gradually adding more pastel pink into the mix, and I'm bringing up the values of these key areas so that it shows that these areas are contoured. So as usual, I like to focus on the joints, I like to focus on the front of the face. Okay, now we've done up the Ork skin and we are going to move on to his companion, which is the Grot. As I mentioned, this Grot might look a little bit out of place because his skin tends to be a little bit more desaturated and a little bit more grim dark in nature. So for all intents and purposes, let's just imagine that this Grot has travelled all the way from the 40k universe into this pastel happy universe so that he can be part of this Ork's wow! So to paint up this Grot, I have selected these colours right here to paint up his grim dark 40k skin. Alternatively, these Games Workshop colours will work just fine. Alright, so let's get out all these colours and let's paint up this interdimensional Grot right now. Alright, so with the Ork Flesh, I'm currently using the same base as the Ork. But what I'm going to be doing is, I'm going to change this up by having the first layer being warmer. So I'm using Frog Green plus Dark Grey. So I'm going to do this pretty liberally, only leaving a little bit of the mint green showing below. Next up, I'm going to be adding in a little bit of pale grey, and I'm going to be just focusing on the planes facing the light source, which is on the right hand side. Remember, you want to do this volumetrically, so you want to identify, like, say for example, the deltoid on this Grot, the foot on the Grot, and the individual toes. Don't go into the details just yet. So next up, I'm adding in a little bit of pink adding a bit of dead red into the existing mix with a little bit of frog green so that I can create some skin and tonal variations to the model. I find that this really helps the model look a lot more realistic, and I like how this is turning out. So gradually we're going to start highlighting these red areas. So what I'm going to be using is dead red plus frog green plus a little bit of pale grey to bring up the value of these colours. Just also going to be doing this in the ears and the nostrils to pick out little bits of detail. Now I'm going to be creating some extreme highlights. Going to be using grimy grey plus frog green plus a little bit of pale grey, and this, if you notice, is still just highlighting the panels that are facing the light. I find that this new style of highlighting really makes the green looks a lot more dynamic. If you look at the 360s, once we're finished, the inside of the Grot really looks like there's a cast shadow. So just look at this right now. Just look at the Grot and you can see that the left hand side of the Grot looks significantly darker. And just gradually adding in just pale grey into the mix. Alright, so now with most of the organic materials done, we're going to move on to the black and brown leather. This is going to be a very quick and dirty step so that we can quickly get these materials rendered up so that the Orks and the Grots don't look naked for too long. So in this segment, I'll be covering how to paint both brown and black leather. And these are the colors that I have chosen to paint the brown and black leather. Alternatively, if you want to use these Games Workshop colors, these colors will work just fine. Okay, let's get all these colors ready and let's get painting the brown and black leather on this entire model right now. So now we're just base coating the brown leather. I'm currently using AK Gen 3 chocolate chipping along with dark grey to desaturate this brown. At this point of time, you just want to achieve a pretty even and flat coating. So right now I'm mixing in a more yellow layer. I'm going to be using AK Gen 3 middle stone with chocolate chipping and with a little bit of dark grey. This sort of increases the value while keeps these colours slightly desaturated. So along with the planes that are affected by the light, I'm adding in more middle stone into the mix. and I'm focusing on just these panels that are exposed to the light. So now I'm just picking on some of the details, adding in a little bit of dark sand with chocolate chipping. As you can see, we have progressed beyond the values of middle stone that I've used previously. So now I'm just picking on the little details that you can see. And now I'm going to be starting the base coats for the black. Of course, I'm just going to be using AK Gen 3 flat black. And I'm just going to be base coating the belts, the boots, little details that are in black leather. So now with the black done, I'm going to be starting to create some contours. I'm currently using dark grey mixed in with black to create the initial volumes. Just be pretty liberal with this because it helps you create some volumes on the black. And you want to create some really sharp highlights, I'm going to be using pure AK Gen 3 dark grey. I find that if you don't push the values high enough for the black actually looks like black. Instead, if you have pushed it slightly higher, it would have registered as grey to the viewer. So now I'm using pale grey just to pick on the little edges, and you gotta just call it done and tastefully stop right here. This project is really going smoothly, and we have gotten the main blocks of this project already done. So let's move on to the smaller segments, and in this segment I'm going to talk about how to paint the teeth and gums on the Squighog. Originally, I was a little bit stumped of what colors I should choose to paint up the gums. Because the Squig is already red, and if I painted the gums pink, it would just blend into the Squig. Fortunately for me, one of my apprentices, Chen Wen, suggested that purple would be a great color, and I thought, why not, let's just give it a try. So as such, the Squig now has purple gums. This is a pretty prominent feature because it is right in the center of the Squighog's face. So as mentioned, this will really draw a lot of attention, so if you paint it well, this will do really nicely. For this segment, I've chosen these colors right here to paint up the teeth and gums of the Squighog. Alternatively, these colors from Games Workshop will work just fine so that you can paint up the teeth and gums of the Squighog. So let's gather these colors right now and let's get painting the teeth and gums of the Squighog right now. So we're going to start off with deep violet and a little bit of dark grey. We're going to use this to start base coating the gums. Next up, I'm going to start highlighting by using a little bit of deep violet added to the mix. And because this is a high gloss surface, I'm going to make sure that the highlights get highlighted up to a really high value. I'm also doing the same material for the tongue. Next up, I'm really picking on the high values by adding in a little bit of pastel pink into the mix. So first, we're going to base coat the teeth, and I'm going to be using green brown plus dark grey. Got to do this pretty liberally, but remember we are base coating, so we want to achieve a flat coat. So next, I'm going to be doing up the volumes of the teeth, and I'm going to be using dark tan plus green brown plus a little bit of dark grey to lower the value. So this desaturates the teeth, and remember, shapes are really important, so you gotta take note of where the lights are coming from. In this case, from the right hand side. Lastly, I'm gonna pick on some highlights using dark tan, and I'm going to do this in a very scratchy manner to show that the surface on these hooves and teeth aren't very sharp. They're all scruffed up. Now that we've done up the teeth and gums, we're going to move on to the next most prominent feature, which is the armor panels on the Squighog. As I painted the Squighog, I decided to change the design from a polka dot, which you'll see during the recording later. And I've also changed the color because I felt that this violet color looks a lot more presentable on armor panels rather than the pink. So you can always substitute the deep violet onto the dead red so that you can get the exact same colors that I have used. For this segment, I'm going to be using these colors right here. Alternatively, these colors from Games Workshop will work just fine. Alright, so let's gather up all these colors and let's get painting the armor panels on the Squighog right now. So for the armor panels, first and foremost, we're going to start off with an even base coat. Currently, I'm using AK Gen 3 grey blue plus a little bit of ducat blue and a bit of grimy grey just to desaturate it. Next up, I'm going to be increasing the values by using the same mix, but then what we're going to do is we're going to mix up the ratio by adding a lot more grimy grey into the mix. Okay, so now we're just going into the highlights and it's mostly grimy grey plus a little bit of ducat blue. It warms up the armor panels. I find that this is really beautiful and I'm using the grimy grey to do a little bit of edge highlighting to show the armor panels. Okay, so right here what you can see is I'm going to be drawing some pink polka dots. I changed this idea later on when I was painting the deep violet stripes. So I've been painting in all the stripes using deep violet. So right here I'm currently using dead red to draw the stripes in, but later on I've just changed it to deep violet. I recommend you do that at least for this color scheme. So when painting the stripes, have a sketch first, then you can thicken up the stripes to make sure that they are equal thickness and equal distance apart from each other. So with all the stripes, I've done the darker areas using blue violet mixed in with a little bit of dark grey. And for the brighter parts, I've just used deep violet rather. So now with the armor panels done on the Squighog, we're going to move on to the next most distinctive feature of the Beast Snagga Boyz, which is the fur. This is going to be a pretty quick segment because I've covered this material in many of my past videos. If you want more detail of how I covered the fur, you can check out the video of how I painted Reduca, because that video really went deep into how to paint fur for miniatures. At this point of time, I really want to see who the real collectors are out there. So if you're still watching now, why don't you comment below "Great White Squig" so that I know that you are a true collector. So for this stage on the white fur, I'm going to be using these colors right here. Alternatively, these Games Workshop colors will work just fine. So why don't we get up these colors and let's get painting the white fur on the Beast Snagga Boyz right now. So with the fur, I'm going to be starting to base coat it with chocolate chipping plus dark grey. Just do this so that you can achieve a flat and even coating. For the purposes, I'm going to be using the back fur as an example. You want to do fur as a volume rather than the individual little spikes that was sculpted in. Currently I'm using middle stone plus dark grey plus grimy grey. Okay, so right here what we're going to do is highlight the next volume. And now I'm going into the details and I'm using grimy grey plus ivory. Just drawing the little stripes in to give the fur a little bit of texture. Now with the first segment done on the Beast Snagga Boyz, it's time to give this guy some bling, and we are going to do so by painting up the non-metallic metal, which is slightly rusty, on this Squighog rider. I'm going to be doing this for all his metal embellishments, as well as this huge rocket spear that he has been designed with. In this segment, I'm going to be working with many funky colors such as pinks, blues, so that we can create this neutral grey, which you will see very shortly. For this segment, I'm going to be using these colors right here. Alternatively, these colors will work just fine. Alright, let's get out all these colors, pinks, blues and whatever, and let's get painting the rusty non-metallic metal steel right now. So now that all the NMM has been coated in this dark brown color, I'm currently using blue-grey plus brown rose to create the initial highlights. Currently the NMM metals have just been coated in burnt umber plus a little bit of black. So I wanted to make the highlights initially a little bit pink first. Then I'm moving on to the next color, which is ducat blue plus a little bit of brown rose, because this will give a little bit of transition. And contrast between the colors. Gradually, I'm adding in a little bit more grimy grey into the mix, so this sort of neutralizes the saturations and it makes it more or less a neutral grey relative to the rest of the colors. So right here, I'm going to be starting to pick on some highlights. I'm going to be adding in ivory into the mix, and this is going to be edge highlighted and picking on some of the edges to show that this is really sharp. I'm also going to be doing this for his metal mohawk. Well, that really added a lot of bling to the model. But do you find that this model looks a little bit too clean for an orc? As we know, orcs are really dirty and their armor tends to be not very well maintained. So we're going to do some weathering on the armor panels right now. I'm going to be using some brush and some sponges and some tweezers. So get all these materials ready. And these are the colors that I will be using to do the weathering on these armor panels. Alternatively, these Games Workshop colors will work just fine. So let's gather up all these colors, let's get painting the weathering on the Squighog Rider Boyz right now. So now we are mostly done with the model. I'm going to start with weathering. I'm going to be using snow blue to pick on some of the chipping. I'm just very roughly edge highlighting, and I'm deliberately trying to make it a little bit rough. As you can see, I'm stippling and stabbing the brush slightly so that this gives me a bit of area so that I can move on to the next stage. So with the next stage, I'm currently using chocolate chipping, and I'm just going to be picking on some of these really thick lines and painting in between the very thick lines to show that this has some areas. Alternatively, what you can do is you can use a sponge with a little bit of chocolate chipping, and you can just sort of like very lightly dab it so that you can show that some areas are being chipped off. I'm going to do this for all the armor panels too. Do this lightly, remember, less is more. Don't be too heavy-handed. Gradually add in the brown chipping as you can. Next, I'm going to be using snow blue, and I'm just going to be touching up some of these areas to pick on some of the highlights. And next, I'm going to be using GW Agrax Earthshade to sort of just draw some streaks down to create the very weathered streaking effect. We are in the final chapter of this video, which is the environment, where we'll cover how we did the basing and how I intend to frame up this entire miniature. This environment chapter is really useful because I'm going to be using this orange color to frame up the cool colors we've been painting on the entire model. As such, these are the materials that I will be using to paint up the environment for the Squighog riders. Alternatively, these GW colors will work just fine. So let's get all these colors ready, get all these materials ready, and let's get finishing our Squighog rider right now! So right here, I'm currently using dry ground from AK Textures, and I'm just going to liberally put it over the ground, and I'm just going to let it dry. I don't want to make this point too thick because I want to make sure that this texture dries fast, and you want to make sure that you continuously pat the surface so that it doesn't give the impression that this was painted on. Next, I'm adding in some flat stones. You can just add rocks anywhere, and I'm just tastefully putting the rocks so that it creates some relief on these areas. So after this, I've airbrushed the entire area on the surface using medium rust plus mud brown. Then next I'm going to be overbrushing with a little bit of light rust in the middle to highlight the model. So next, just testing the fit of the model and just gonna clean up. Gonna do the overbrush on the smoke plumes right here too. Next, I'm gonna be putting in some deck tan mixed in with a little bit of light rust, and I'm gonna be highlighting the volumes on the smoke plumes right now. So when you're highlighting the smoke plumes, you want to do it in a stabby manner. When you do it in a stabby manner, it really gives the impression that the smoke plume is sort of like forming, and it gives it a very rough texture. Slowly but surely adding in a little bit of deck tan to bring out the extreme highlights. Okay, so right now, after I glued the model on, I'm going to be adding in a little bit of medium rust plus mud brown and a little bit of light rust, and this will form the reflected light on the model. So you want to do this for all the underlying surfaces, the tongue, the teeth, all sorts of funky stuff, so that you have the impression that light is being reflected from the bottom of the ground. And there we have it. This is the finished result of the Squighog rider and the Squighog. I really like how expressive the two riders are, and this pastel wave color scheme really stands out from the crowd. While this is a really small model, there are a lot of materials as well as considerations while painting up this Squighog rider. As such, this video is a pretty long one, and I'd really like to thank you for watching all the way till the end. At this time, I'd like to invite you to join in our community where you get some behind the scenes peeks into what is happening in the studio, and it is absolutely free. Just click the link down below to join our community right now. Otherwise, why not just give me a like and subscribe if you think I deserve it, and because it helps us produce more videos like this. And I'd like to extend my greatest thanks to my patrons because due to their generous support, I'm able to produce videos such as this so that we all get to become better miniature painters together. So if you'd like to support the channel even more directly, why not head on to the Patreon? And remember, every single dollar that you provide as a patron goes into producing videos such as this. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart, and I hope to see you in the next Beast Snagga painting video. See you.